stream. I'm a little bit small. Let me just think that should be good. Yeah, I think that should be good. Today we're reacting to theme park accidents. So accidents that have happened at theme parks, because theme parks aren't always safe. I know most of the time it is, like, you know, person's fault because they do like dumbass things. But there are those rare times where it is the ride's fault, or the theme park's fault anyway. But anyway, on the screen we already have a corny name for a roller coaster. So yeah, let's just watch, because I've waffled pretty much enough. Hopefully I can get a proper thumbnail made for this stream and actually upload it properly. But yeah, let's go.
This colossal wooden ride, called Son of Beast, holds a legendary status. Part of Kings Island Amusement Park in Ohio, it was built as a sequel to their previous wooden coaster, the Beast. But like any good son, this new beast exceeded its predecessor in every way. It was the world's fastest and tallest wooden roller coaster, whipping riders around at a staggering 78 miles per hour from peaks as high as 218 feet. And to add the cherry on top, it was also the only wooden coaster with a loop when it opened back in the year 2000. But being made out of wood didn't make for the smoothest journey. Structural issues gave Son of Beast a reputation for being a jerky and rough ride, although that made some sadists love it all the more. But it got a little too rough back in 2006. As a train of riders looped around the Rose Bowl section, their train suddenly bucked as if it had hit a huge pothole. At those high speeds, the damage was serious, and 27 riders were sent to the hospital with severe neck and chest injuries. Inspectors later revealed a wooden support beam underneath that section had cracked and splintered, and the ride was shut down. It was repaired and reopened in 2009, but then another rider suffered an injury on board, though this time it was head trauma caused by the coaster's violent shaking. Even though a thorough investigation found no irregularities, its bumpy past and rough reputation was enough to see it shut down indefinitely that year. The wonderful wooden structure was later demolished in 2012, proving that what goes up must eventually come crashing down. The Dangerous Dragon Challenge. When Universal Studios in Orlando, Florida opened a dragon-themed ride in 1999, roller coaster fanatics were left awestruck. Originally called Dueling Dragons, the ride consisted of a pair of inverted, intertwined roller coasters that chased each other around like two dragons fighting in the air. At one point, the two trains even inverted riders and looped them round just 18 inches apart. After that, I bet all those riders were left feeling like they'd really conquered a dragon. It was later renamed the Dragon Challenge and added to the park's Wizarding World of Harry Potter section. But shortly after the move, the Dragon Riders started misbehaving. In 2011, a 52-year-old man was on the ride when, during that iconic loop, something flung out from the other car and struck him across the face. The damage was so bad that his entire eye had to be removed. Ouch! Concerned that riders weren't taking the many no loose object signs seriously, operators began setting the two trains off at different times to avoid any similar incidents. But this would turn out to be a killing blow for the dragons. Without the dueling feature, the ride's popularity dwindled, and by 2017, it was shut down to make way for something more magical and less dangerous. Now, if you're looking for a wild ride without the risk of losing an eye, then go ahead and hit those like and subscribe buttons. I can't send you through a loop-de-loop, but I'll turn your world upside down with videos about things you never knew before. All done? Great. Now, where were we?
About that slot.
Grueling Green Lantern. The 2011 Green Lantern film was universally panned when it hit the silver screen, so you might not be surprised to learn that the Green Lantern First Flight roller coaster was just as disappointing. When it opened in Six Flags Magic Mountain back in 2011, it was hyped up as the world's first completely vertical pattern zigzagged roller coaster with 360-degree spinning seats. But this design made it look more like a giant pinball machine than a ride. Nevertheless, Six Flags' fans lined up to try it out, and boy did most of them regret it. Riders were jerked and jostled around the short 825-foot track at top speeds of just 37 miles per hour. It wrenched them around corners and spun them awkwardly into sudden angles. So instead of feeling like they were flying superheroes, it shook them around like fish in a big green bag. Riders quickly took to the internet to complain about how painful the experience was, while others berated it for being short and boring. Fortunately, Six Flags' fans didn't have to suffer for much longer. In 2017, the ride...
Well, that's not really the biggest complaints the ride got. Like, yeah, that is one of them, like, short and boring. Like, yeah, it is, but the biggest one was because it was like a ball buster. It's like a bit of a nut buster. That was like the most common complaints. I know a little bit about this because I think I saw like a POV of it. That was like the biggest complaint. That was a ball buster, not that it was short and boring. So maybe show the more relevant reviews.
And closed unexpectedly for unknown reasons. Some speculated it was because of bad reviews and injuries, while others believed it was down to its waning popularity. Whatever the reason, it stood vacant for 2 years before the park announced it was shutting the ride down for good in 2019. That means this hugely hyped ride operated for an embarrassingly short 6 years. Just like the film, this roller coaster turned out to be one huge flop. Oh no, Oppa. Is it just me, or does anyone else find the garishly painted carts on some family-friendly roller coasters, like this or this, really creepy? Well, unfortunately, the unsettling design of the Oppa roller coaster carts at Mount Olympus Park in Wisconsin wasn't the worst thing about them. The colorful indoor coaster was only 43 feet high, and with a top speed of just 29 miles per hour, riders didn't go wild as much as they went mild. Though that didn't mean it wasn't dangerous. Back in 2014, Anthony Thiessen was accompanying his grandkids on the ride when his safety bar suddenly failed. As the ride hit a corner, Anthony was flung out like a rag doll and fell 17 feet onto the hard concrete below.
Where's Mount Olympus again? Yeah, I don't know. I mean, having a look at Mount Olympus, it's not really a surprise that happened. Wait, where is Mount Olympus? Let me just Google this real quick. Wisconsin. Yep, that tells me everything I need to know. It's in Wisconsin. I mean, going to a theme park in Wisconsin is like, it's just like going to Chernobyl.
Oh, that's like falling out of a 1.5-story window. Anthony was placed into a medically induced coma for a month due to the severity of his injuries, but he miraculously survived. The roller coaster, on the other hand, didn't. Safety inspectors began testing the ride, using sandbags to represent the rider's weights. But they all watched in disbelief as the lap bar suddenly popped open at the point of the track where Anthony had been thrown. There was no doubt that Mount Olympus had failed to properly maintain the coaster, forcing them to permanently close the ride that same year. Well, I for one am not sad to see the back of those creepy-looking mousemobiles.
Get in your mouse and get out of here.
The human catapult. Slingshot and catapult rides have become increasingly popular with adrenaline junkies in recent years, and it's not hard to see why. Riders are securely strapped into a single steel capsule, which is attached to industrial-strength spring cables pinned to the top of two huge towers. The cables are then gradually tautened as the capsule remains strapped to the launch pad. Then, with the push of a button, the capsule is released. Like a stone from a slingshot, riders can be catapulted up to 450 feet in the air at breathtaking speeds of around 100 miles per hour. That's one way to get rid of your girlfriend, but as fun as they look to people filming them from the ground, the G-force these rides produce can reach up to 5 Gs, which is enough to make some riders hilariously faint. But that's not the worst thing that can happen on these rides. Back in 2015, Drew Larson was shooting a video of his 13-year-old son about to ride Wisconsin's Mount Olympus catapult with a family friend. The ride was designed to hurl passengers 200 feet up into the air at 60 miles per hour. But just moments before the ride attendants hit the launch button, something terrible happened.
D-Man, drop a beat!
A beat was certainly
Without
dropped.
warning, the cable on one side of the ride snapped, smashing all that tension just inches away from the boy. Now, these rides operate by applying around 40 tons of pressure through those cables. So if that kid had just been a few more inches to his right, they would have needed a spatula to get him off the ground. What an unbelievably lucky escape. While state documents showed that the ride had passed inspections a month before, Mount Olympus had previously failed to show the proper maintenance documentation for the catapult back in 2013. And when you take a look at the frayed cables on the side it looks like that paperwork might still have been missing. The ride was thankfully shut down and removed from the park just 2 days later, which probably saved future patrons from becoming pancakes. Cosmonaut Chaos. The resplendent Russian city of St. Petersburg is marveled for its architecture and history, but it's got something else guaranteed to entertain its visitors. Located in the central Petrogradsky district, the Divo Ostrov amusement park is a thrill-seeker's dream come true, and at the center of it all spins this utter beast. Known simply as the Rocket, this high ride loads up 10 wannabe cosmonauts onto a ground-level gondola, which is attached to that giant arm by 2 cables at its front and back. The arm then gradually winds them up before spinning them round 200 feet in the air. But as they're in flight, the gondola rapidly spins on its own axis, turning passengers upside down and giving them a real taste of space travel. Just watching that is making my head turn as much as my stomach. Although not as much as this clip from 2010 does. On that fateful day, 10 people had their lives hanging by a thread, literally, after one of the rocket's cables snapped mid-ride. It took rescue crews more than an hour to get all the riders down, but thankfully, no one reported any injuries. An initial investigation revealed that the hot weather that day may have weakened the metal within the cables, causing them to break. But surely, being an outdoor space, these rides should have been designed to handle high temperatures in the first place. Well, despite that disturbing revelation, the ride was only shut down briefly for repairs before reopening later that year. So remember, kids, in Russia, amusement park rides you. Not smiling now. When the world record-breaking inverted roller coaster, the Smiler, was opened in Alton Towers in England, it really did have fans smiling in anticipation. With 14 inversions, it promised to flip riders upside down more than any other roller coaster on the planet. But all those smiles soon turned to screams after the shocking events of 2015. As a car full of riders looped around the track, they suddenly noticed an empty test car that was stuck in front of them. They screamed desperately for help, but it was already too late. They collided with such force that the metal of their car buckled, pinning the front row passengers into their seats. Rescue teams rushed to the site and spent hours trying to remove them from the wreckage. All 16 riders suffered some degree of injury, but 2 girls in the front row were so badly pinned that they each horrifically lost a leg. The ride was closed, and an in-depth investigation was set in motion. It was revealed that a fault had been detected on the ride earlier that day. So, in line with procedure, the operator sent out an empty test car. However, the test car got stuck on a loop because of some high winds and didn't clear the track. Without realizing what had happened, the operators overrode the safety warnings and released the next car full of passengers, sending it careening into the test car. And at those speeds, it was like watching a 90 miles per hour car crash. This operational oversight was so serious that Alton Towers' parent company, Merlin Group, shut down 3 other rides it owned that operated similarly. Eventually, inadequate training and human error were blamed for the accident, and Merlin Group—
Hang on a second, I just need to charge my laptop. I'm not sure if it's charging already, I'm just gonna check. Okay, it's charging now.
Group was forced to cough up millions of pounds in compensation. But just 9 months later, the Smiler was unbelievably back in action. It just didn't seem like a long enough time to have fixed all those issues, and Merlin Group was accused of putting profits before people. Nevertheless, the ride has operated without any further incidents since, although I reckon they should have changed its name. Instead of the Smiler, how about the Crasher? Maybe the Smasher? Or perhaps just the Death Trap. Got any better names? Let me know down in the comments below. Class Action Park.
Ah, yes.
Back in the 70s and 80s, health and safety was a lot more of a suggestion than it was a rule, as proven by the existence of Action Park. Often hilariously called Class Action Park for the number of injury lawsuits filed against it, it was widely considered to be the most dangerous amusement park in the world. It opened in New Jersey back in 1978, and the rides they boasted were all utterly insane. Walking into the park, you first saw the mind-blowing Cannonball Loop.
Yeah, maybe that one stayed in the draft, but everything else seemed fine.
It was an enclosed tube slide, which riders slid down in pitch black that flung them—
Yeah, but surely, like, if you, like, go down here, surely, like, you're gonna hit the bottom of the loop right there. You're gonna, like, face smash into the bottom bit right here. If you manage to even get fully round the loop, that is.
Through a loop-de-loop before plunging them into the water. But
then, like, basically, like, they'd have to, like, because, like, you're upside down, right? And crash down, you'd be facing this way, so you'd have to, like, turn around and crawl your way out, right? If that did happen, like, if you crashed down there, like, you surely, like, you would have to do that.
Slide wasn't properly padded, and so being whipped through this hard plastic shell at breakneck speed left many of its testers missing teeth. Next to that was the Colorado River Ride, a truly demented version of a classic lazy river ride. Riders were given rubber rafts and mercilessly hurled against the ride's sides, bashing their knees, feet, and hands as they were flushed down. And then there was Surf Hill, a large slide split into several lanes that, thanks to some seriously shonky engineering, saw riders catapulted into the air at the slightest bump. Ooh, ouch! My shins are bruised just watching this, as you can probably tell.
Yeah, those didn't. I mean, yeah, they did sort of injure you on the way down, but they weren't that bad. Not like the Cannonball Loop.
Well, the rides were.
Oh no, you just gotta, like, tuck your feet in. When you hit those wall corners, just gotta tuck your feet in.
so dangerous that no self-respecting insurance company would insure the park. So, Action Park CEO Eugene Mulvihill set up his own insurance company and illegally insured it himself. And that, kids, is what we call fraud. Even so, the death-defying Cannonball Loop was open for a whole month before it was shut down after riders complained of broken noses and back injuries. But that was just the tip of the injury iceberg. Action Park dubiously reported just 14 broken bones and 26 head injuries in its 18-year tenure, although the real total is believed to be much, much higher. But that's not the worst part, because the park also claimed the lives of not one, not two, but 6 people before it was shut down in 1996. Oh boy, sounds like this place wasn't a water park as much as it was a watery grave. The Perilous Plunge. Knott's Berry Farm likes to market itself as California's #1 theme park, and I'm sure that would be true if it weren't for the sheer number of serious accidents they've had. Since 1983, at least 16 people have been injured, some fatally, on the park's 40 roller coasters and family rides. Although one accident on the well-loved Perilous Plunge water ride really put the serious in mysterious. When it opened in 2000, the ride boasted a record-breaking 115-foot super steep plunge from the top, guaranteed to get riders' hearts pumping and shirts soaking. Despite the height, riders were only secured by a lap bar and a seatbelt, which proved to be a problem for some of their larger guests. In 2001, a 300-pound rider somehow slipped out of these restraints and fell more than 100 feet into the shallow pool below. Sadly, she didn't survive. But when the boat returned to the station, her lap bar and seatbelt were somehow still locked. No one was able to figure out how the restraints could have failed until the coroner noted,
Alright, I have something for the viewers that come across this video. If you're big, don't ride rides. It's that simple.
That the 50-inch seatbelt was 8 inches shorter than her abdomen. To fit in, she placed the seatbelt over her legs and consequently slipped out of the boat as it began to plunge. She clearly shouldn't have been allowed to ride, and her family sued the park for damages. But after a short closure, the ride reopened with new 4-point restraints, so that no guest, no matter their shape or size, could accidentally slip out ever again. Das ist verrückt.
Well, yeah, but it's not really the park's fault. I mean, she might have insisted, hey, please, can I go on this ride, please? I could get the seatbelt or squeeze. It's just not really taking responsibility, is it?
The word verrückt means crazy or insane in German, which made it the perfect name for the world's tallest water slide. Built in Kansas City's Schlitterbahn Park, the Verrückt had a chute slide that was a gargantuan 168 feet tall. From the top, it launched riders down a 17-story death drop before hurling them over a 5-story slope at speeds of up to 70 miles per hour. Okay, that looks insanely exhilarating. But as you can imagine, engineering something this tall and slippery came with some serious bumps. So serious that during test runs, if the rafts were loaded with more than 1,000 pounds, they flew off the slide entirely. But instead of improving the ride, designers simply placed netting over most of it to keep riders from going airborne. I mean, I'm no expert, but even to me, that doesn't sound safe at all. But Schlitterbahn had made some serious financial donations to the state of Kansas, and so, by law, it was allowed to make its own safety inspections. Could that sound any more suspicious? Well, after roughly concluding that each raft had to weigh between...
yeah, the problem is this, slope down here. I mean, I know it sort of goes airborne, right at the beginning, there. But if it was just, a flat slope down here, I don't think there'd be a problem. I think it would still be open now. if it was just a flat slope. I think the biggest mistake was just putting this hill right here. Because obviously the hill's going to make you go airborne and then you'll just go into the net. Which is, I think is what happened, but anyway.
400 and 550 pounds to be, safe. The ride was opened in 2014, but these shady safety practices sealed the fate of this fatal slide. In 2016, a 10-year-old boy perished on Verrückt when he was ejected up into the netting. 2 women in the same raft were also gravely injured, and the police began a thorough investigation. The combined weight of the 3 passengers reached a supposedly safe 545 pounds, but the 73-pound boy had been allowed to ride in the front. Experts believe this uneven weight distribution contributed to the raft going airborne over the second hump, something that rigorous testing should have spotted. The blatant safety violations of the ride saw it shut down and dismantled in 2016, and a swift change in law made it so the park couldn't conduct safety self-inspections ever again. The human trebuchet. A trebuchet is a kind of medieval catapult that was designed to hurl huge objects with a sling through the force of a counterweight. These were great for sieges, as their projectiles landed on or over city walls in unpredictable patterns. So knowing all that, no one would be dumb enough to consider strapping a human into one of these, right? Wrong. Back in the 1990s, the Dangerous Sports Club in England built an enormous trebuchet on a Somerset estate with the sole purpose of launching people onto a distantly placed net. For just 40 pounds, which would be roughly $140 today, almost anyone could sign up to be haphazardly hurled 100 feet over the English countryside. And this was about as safe as it sounded. One woman who tested it out, called Stella Young, did manage to hit the net, but then promptly bounced out of it, breaking her neck and her pelvis. But instead of shutting this death trap...
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, what if they bounce out the net? And whoop, look at that. Someone did bounce out the net.
Down, they simply added a bigger net and tucked people into a ball so they didn't flail and bounce out as they landed. Now, like I said before, trebuchets are not precision instruments, and this will become all too clear in 2002. A poor student called Kostadin Yankov, who tried out this terrible trebuchet, was flung so far off target that he missed the net completely. And sadly, he didn't survive. It was an accident just waiting to happen, and one which finally shut this idiotic ride down for good. Fatal Fujin Raijin II. Expoland had been a popular theme park in Japan since it opened in 1972, and the amazing Fujin Raijin II was one of the most famous attractions. Built in 1992, this steel coaster strapped its riders in standing up, all before whipping them over more than a half a mile of track at around 70 miles per hour. It was a huge success and operated without a single issue for 15 years. But in 2007, as the train was about to enter a circular section of the ride, the wheel axle of the second car suddenly broke, causing it to tip sideways. It traveled almost 1,000 feet before the broken section hit a guardrail, slamming the train to a halt. The event cost the life of a young woman, and 19 others were injured. After a thorough investigation, it was revealed that the car's axles hadn't been replaced in a shocking 15 years. But the axles weren't even part of the daily or monthly routine inspections. But this unbelievable oversight ended up costing more than just one human life. The entire park closed while the investigation took place, and the ride was pulled down. Though when it eventually reopened in 2015, nobody came back. Expoland had lost the people's trust, and just 2 short years later, the park shut its gates forever. Flying Fascist Machine. A ride's design usually falls into one of 3 categories. There's the good, there's the bad, and then there's the downright wrong. And anyone who knows their history can see that this one fits into that very last category. This unfortunately designed ride, called the Adlerflug, which roughly translates to Eagle's Flight, was installed in Tasmania Theme Park in Löfingen, Germany. You heard that right. Germany. This just gets worse and worse by the minute.
No! These jokes really do write
It was naively
sometimes.
designed in 2019, with each of the two heads' spinning arms designed to look like eagles. As they lifted up and rotated, riders would be able to loop about the skies as free as a bird. But from a distance, these 8 spinning arms look like 2 spinning hate symbols, which are notorious in Germany for all the wrong reasons. So notorious that displaying these anti-constitutional symbols is illegal across the country. The mistake was innocent enough, and the park's owner, Rüdiger Braun, apologized profusely for any offense caused. But instead of shutting the ride down completely, he got to work removing 2 of the arms from each head. Now, when they spin, they look like 2 perfectly innocent pinwheels instead of a rotating hate crime. Did you survive any of these reckless rides when they were still in
Oh yeah, because I
operation?
definitely rode all of those rides, yeah. Some of these, yeah, I definitely rode some of these, before I was born, yeah, totally. Now, this one, I believe. I think this is part 2.
Whether it's a roller coaster or a water slide, nothing gets your heart pounding like a high-octane theme park ride. But for all the seatbelts, lap bars, and warning signs, they're not always as safe as they seem. From poor maintenance and sheer negligence to utterly insane designs, there have been many rides that were just accidents waiting to happen. So it's time to buckle up and brace yourself as we take a look at even more theme park rides that had to be shut down. The Sand Blaster. Daytona Beach's Boardwalk is a famous Floridian amusement park, although one of its rides made national headlines for all the wrong reasons several years ago. The Sand Blaster, which was a fairly standard 53-foot steel roller coaster built back in the 1970s, had been operating on the boardwalk since 2013, but in June 2018, disaster struck when the coaster's front car suddenly derailed, throwing 2 riders 34 feet to the ground. That's like being shoved out of a 3-story building. Ouch! Miraculously, no one died. The incident immediately shut the ride down, and Floridian officials began to investigate. But what they found shocked them to the core. A little over a year before, inspectors assessing the ride had ordered it to stop immediately after finding not 1, not 2, but more than a dozen violations. These included damaged seats, excessive corrosion, and even a large crack in the track. These weren't things just a lick of paint could fix, so the ride was shut down for some serious maintenance and reopened 5 months later. But then, in May, less than a month before the accident, the ride failed its inspection again due to more excessive corrosion. After even more maintenance, another inspector gave it the green light to reopen. But just a few hours later, this terrible tragedy struck. Whoa, had that inspector been wearing a blindfold? Ultimately, the investigation revealed that the cars had been hitting the corners way too fast at a whopping 22 miles per hour, causing the derailment. To make matters worse, engineers also found evidence on the track that the Sand Blaster had derailed several times in the past without ever being reported to the state. The dark history and clear negligence the Sand...
Wait, how does a roller coaster derail and no one knows about it? Like... It's like, it definitely will make some noise when it derails. I mean, unless if this was for testing, but even then, like, if there's no people on it still, like, you'll still hear it crash to the ground.
And Blaster boasted sealed its fate, and the ride was torn down in 2019. Shocking theme park incidents like these can make for pretty disturbing headlines when they occur, and, much like the news in general, put a damper on people's days. But luckily, there's a way to balance out the doom and gloom of today's news, all thanks to Daily Peanut. This innovative service delivers the Vortex. Thorpe Park likes to market itself as the UK's most thrilling theme park, And that's technically true. If by thrilling, they mean terrifying, thanks to an accident that occurred there back in 2018. Their ride, the Vortex, is designed to whirl riders around on a large mechanical arm that pivots on an axle. So, while they're being whipped around, riders are also swung side to side up to 65 feet in the air. Looks like the ultimate way to make someone dizzy. But back in 2018, it was the people watching the riders that felt sick. As the arm swung its screaming riders round, something huge suddenly ripped off the ride. It plummeted towards the riders on the downswing and, thankfully, missed them by mere inches. Operators shut down the ride immediately, fearing that it could have been a piece of critical machinery and the ride might break apart above them any second. But on a closer inspection, they realized that it was just a piece of foam that had flown off one of the ride's seats that was out of order. Relieved, they performed a few routine safety checks before reopening the vortex just 15 minutes later. What a dizzyingly close call! The vertical accelerator. In 2019, two steely-nerved gents got into the seats of the Vertical Accelerator, a slingshot ride at Florida's Cobra Adventure Park. They were being recorded by their friends, who were teasing them about their upcoming 160-foot skyward trip.
You're gonna be screaming like sissies in about 10 seconds. I'm not. About 3. Yeah, you are.
Now, did anyone else notice how worn and stretched those cables on the left look compared to the right? Well, keep watching them, because just as the operator was about to pull the release lever, something truly shocking happened. That was one seriously close call. If that ride operator had noticed the shredding cord even a second later, those gents might have been flung to their deaths. Luckily, no one was hurt, and the ride was closed immediately. You'd think Cobra Adventure Park would have launched...
Well, I swear some of that little dust hit the guy on the left, right? No, wait, let me just see that again.
Watching them, because just as the operator was about to pull the release lever, something truly shocking happened.
Yeah, some of that dust went on him. It's like the last one.
That was one seriously close call. If that ride operator had noticed the shredding cord even a second later, those gents might have been flung to their deaths. Luckily, no one was hurt, and the ride was closed
I mean, I don't know. I feel like it's just the rope that fell. I feel like the lap bar didn't fail, so I think even if it went up in the air, they would have swung down and hit the support on the side. But the impact, maybe death? I don't know. I'm not entirely
immediately.
Sure.
You'd think Cobra Adventure Park would have launched a full investigation into this near miss. However, they only released a statement claiming all their attractions, and I quote, always maintained the highest safety standards. I'm sorry, were they even watching the same video we just saw? Well, a quick glance on Google Maps shows that today the vertical accelerator is still standing. Do you think this dangerous failure to launch was an acceptable accident, or should it have been shut down for good? Let me know in the comments. The Leap the Gap. The very concept of a track-jumping roller coaster is something that true adrenaline junkies dream about. But I'm sorry to say that such an insane-sounding ride doesn't exist, and probably never will, thanks to a little-known thing called physics. Because roller coaster trains don't have engines, they rely on a delicate and ever-changing balance of inertia, gravity, and energy to keep them rolling. So, without the track, they're completely unpredictable and uncontrollable. However, this limitation hasn't stopped people from bringing a trackless loop-the-loop to life with some top-tier visual effects. I mean, this clip looks so realistic, it actually went viral. But if it was real, the slightest breeze would knock that train off course and send it crashing to the ground. With all that being said, no one would ever be dumb enough to try and make a train-jumping track, right? Well, back in 1902, the Coney Island Cannon Coaster was originally going to include a track that genuinely jumped a gap. trains would have been hauled up to the crest of a hill, rolled through a large cannon-shaped tunnel, and then propelled over a gap in the track at the end. This death-defying stunt was meant to make riders feel like they'd just been shot out of a cannon. While the track was built to spec, several tests done with sandbags resulted in a catastrophic number of crashes, and the idea was thankfully abandoned. The track was filled in, but at just 40 feet high with no real speed, the resulting cannon coaster was pretty boring, even by 1902 standards. This led to its closure a mere 5 years after it was built. Wow, what a misfire. The Tsunami. With a name like the Tsunami, you'd be forgiven for thinking this next ride was some sort of insane wave pool. But surprisingly, it was an inverted steel roller coaster based in M&D's theme park in Scotland. The ride had traveled around the country as part of M&D's carnival before arriving at the park back in 2004. Even though the 66-foot high coaster was well loved, it didn't have the best track record. In 2011, it broke down, leaving riders stranded 60 feet in the air for 8 long hours. They were eventually rescued by being abseiled out of their seats. As heart attack-inducing as it looks, that event paled in comparison to the disaster that occurred in June 2016. That afternoon, the Tsunami's yellow train was running along the tracks when suddenly the entire thing derailed. It struck a support beam at a shocking 40 miles per hour and plunged down 30 feet below, landing in a devastating heap in front of the ride. 2 adults and 8 children were injured in the crash, but despite the drastic scenes, no lives were lost. A health and safety investigation was launched into the devastating accident, but investigators weren't prepared for what they found. Repairs had been carried out on the axles of the passenger cars several days before. However, the welding metal that had been used was totally incompatible. This meant that when the train had entered a critical turn, the axles failed, derailing the entire thing. And to make matters worse, a ride inspector had approved the works just 16 days before the incident. In the end, the inspector was banned from working, the Tsunami was removed from the park, and M&D were fined just under $100,000 for health and safety breaches. It may not have had anything in common with a real tsunami, but this ride sure ended being one serious disaster. Is all this making you reevaluate going to a theme park ever again? Well, I know a place where you can be entertained without risking your life. Right here. Just hit those like and subscribe buttons down below, and you'll be the first to know when I've dropped an exciting new video. All done? Great. Now, what horror coaster do we have next? Hypersonic XLC. The Hypersonic XLC at King's Dominion Amusement Park in Virginia had a bad reputation for having a 2-hour-long wait for a 10-second-long ride. But that's hardly fair. Technically, the ride was 20 seconds long. Using a prototype air compression system, riders were launched from 0 to 80 miles per hour in just 1.5 seconds, accelerating up a 165-foot hill before plummeting vertically down the other side. And, as this lady is about to demonstrate, it was just as fast as it sounds.
I think it's the camera that shows how fast it is, not the lady.
Hope she liked her new hairdo. Opened in 2001, this unique prototype attraction became a seriously popular coaster. However, rumors began to surface that passengers who put their hands up at the start would frequently suffer from dislocated shoulders just from the sheer force of the launch. Apparently, this resulted in several lawsuits that were so damaging to King's Dominion, the ride was forced to shut down for good in 2007. That's just 6 short years after it was opened. But here's the thing, I can't find any records of the lawsuits or even the injuries at all. It turns out the real reason the ride was shut down wasn't because it was dangerous, but because it was unreliable. Because it was a prototype, the ride had to undergo months of downtime every season for maintenance. being a huge drain on the park's finances and resources, it was eventually put up for sale. But no other parks were willing to take on such a risk of a ride, and so it was dismantled and sadly forgotten. I don't know about you, but I preferred the dislocated shoulder explanation. The Emerald Plunge. The opening day of any amusement park usually has riders screaming in excitement, but the opening day of the Wave Water Park in Dublin, California left one rider screaming in pain. Back in 2017, a 10-year-old boy decided to try out the brand new Emerald Plunge slide, which dropped riders almost vertically down 48 feet onto a shallow pool below. He was well within the height and weight limits, but when he reached the bottom, he skidded over the water and was sent careening over the side onto the bare concrete. Ouch! I'd have been crying for my mommy. But this little legend got up and walked it off. Even though he wasn't seriously injured, the ride was closed just 90 minutes after it had been opened for the first time. Investigators were brought in to figure out what had gone wrong and sent a 78-pound sandbag, which weighed the same amount as the boy, down the slide. But when it hit the pool, they watched in horror as it too was sent flying over the sides. They concluded that a deep pool of water at the bottom of the flume caused a fast stop for lighter riders. This was a basic error that should have been picked up on during testing. The plunge's manufacturer, Whitewater, insisted it undertook extensive testing on all of its rides, but the thorough investigation determined that was a huge lie. Not only that, but it also revealed they'd arbitrarily taken the height and weight restrictions from common roller coaster requirements without any proof they kept people safe on their slides. The boy's family filed a lawsuit and settled with the manufacturer, who begrudgingly took full responsibility. The slide eventually reopened in 2018 following some small water flow changes, and this time it managed to stay open for more than 90 minutes. Superman, Tower of Power. The thought of being thrown from a speeding roller coaster is scary, but it's nothing compared to what 13-year-old Caitlin Lassiter went through at Six Flags Kentucky Kingdom. Back in 2007, Caitlin was getting ready to ride the park's Superman Tower of Power. It was a drop tower ride, which lifted riders almost 180 feet in the air before dropping them at a speedy 54 miles per hour. Just watching it is enough to make your stomach flip. But as Caitlin was being hoisted up, the ride jolted and she heard a sort of strange whipping sound. Suddenly, a cable that had been lifting the ride up fell on top of her, and part of it wrapped around her dangling legs. Terrified, the people next to her screamed at the operators to stop the ride, but it was no use. The car dropped, and the cables severed both of poor Caitlin's feet. She was rushed into surgery, and the doctors were able to reattach her right foot, but her left wasn't as lucky, and she was left with life-changing injuries. The ride was shut down, and after a thorough investigation, it never reopened. It turned out the
so Caitlin, how did you lose your legs? Oh my god, what happened to your legs? How did you lose them? Oh, it was a theme park ride, yeah. Theme park ride. That's how it happened. Yeah, just the cable just cut my feet off. Yep.
faulty cable had gradually deteriorated over time, something that park inspectors had suspiciously never spotted. To make it worse, the 18-year-old ride operators heard the snapping noise and failed to hit the emergency stop button in time. If they had, experts believed Caitlin would have come away with just a few scrapes instead of 2 missing feet. All these factors fell firmly on Six Flags' shoulders, and Caitlin's family rightfully sued the park for negligence. They received an undisclosed settlement, which included around $500,000 in medical bills alone. Left without a leg to stand on, much like Caitlin, Six Flags demolished the ride before the start of the 2008 season. Ride of Steel. The Tower of Power isn't the only Superman-themed ride with a super villainous past. The Ride of Steel was built back in 1999 in New York's Darien Lake theme park, which is now also a Six Flags location. This megacoaster climbs up more than 200 feet and flies along the tracks at over 70 miles per hour, giving riders a real taste of what it's like to be Superman. Minus the bright red cape and underpants. However, back in 2011, chaos erupted shortly after Sergeant James Hackhammer, a courageous war veteran who'd lost both of his legs defending his country, boarded the ride. Sat at the very front, the train whipped around the track and was approaching one of the smaller hills when, suddenly, Sergeant Hackhammer was ejected from his seat. Sadly, he didn't survive, and the ride was closed indefinitely. An investigation found that in the Ride of Steel operator's training
fell out of a roller coaster? Jinkies. Oh my god. Wow. Oh, what a shock.
Manual, it stated that all riders must have two functioning legs. This is because the T-bar ride restraints are designed to hold riders in at the hip and shin. However, even as Hackhammer's friends lifted him into the front seat, giving operators a full view.
This is why there needs to be instructions on shampoo bottles. That's why they're there. Because of people like him.
Of his handicap, they did not think to stop him from boarding. Rumors then began to fly that a park employee had told Hackhammer that he could get on any of the rides, but this turned out to be false. He'd actually been offered a brochure of safety information about the rides but had refused it, claiming he already had a copy. Ultimately, the ride was allowed to reopen, but the blame fell on Darien Lake's shoulders, and they ended up having to pay out an undisclosed seven-figure settlement. Although this wasn't the Ride of Steel's first time in the media spotlight. In 1999, a man weighing more than 300 pounds slipped from the ride's restraints and was thrown 10 feet to the ground. During an investigation, Darien Lake argued that the restraints worked as they were meant to, but they'd failed to engage properly because of his size. He was awarded $2.85 million in compensation, and the ride was started up again after more secure restraints were added to the trains. The Cyclone.
A guy with no legs, and now a beast guy. They need to just tell them, hey, you cannot ride our rides, you fucking idiots. Boom, problem solved.
The city of New York is home to Coney Island's Luna Park, one of the most famous amusement parks in the world. And right at its center lies the legendary Cyclone roller coaster. Opened in 1926, this iconic wooden coaster hauls riders up to the height of an 8-story building before letting them loose around hills and bends at a breathtaking 60 miles per hour. For almost 100 years, the Cyclone has been a local institution, even though it doesn't have the greatest safety record on track. Riders are only secured by a single lap bar, which is easy for some idiots to overpower or wriggle out from. Back in 1985, a man stood up on the ride for an extra hit of adrenaline, but accidentally hit a crossbeam and was sent tumbling to the ground below. Then, in 1988, a construction worker took a turn on the Cyclone and decided he too would try standing up as the train went down a steep hill. As you might have guessed, he was also sent careening over the side. Unfortunately, neither of these riders survived. But because these accidents were a result of their own actions, the Cyclone still operates to this day. But seeing the similarity of their idiotic choices, you'd think Luna Park would have refitted the trains with better restraints, right? Or at the very least, a mandatory IQ test. Well, instead of that, the park operators just painted a "Remain Seated" sign at the coaster's peak. Now that is health and safety at its finest. New Texas Giant.
I mean, yeah, of course. I mean, it's like an old roller coaster. They wouldn't really want to change anything about it. So, yeah.
When the Texas Giant debuted in 1990, it set the astonishing record of being the tallest wooden roller coaster in the entire world. This beast was made with over 900,000 board feet of wood, making up its many heart-racing hills, drops, and vertical skirting turns. And at more than 140 feet high, with a top speed of 65 miles per hour, some of its drops were like falling off a 13-story building. As fun as it was, the wooden ride had a terrible reputation for being way too rough. This led to its renovation in 2009, and it was eventually reopened in 2011 as the aptly named New Texas Giant. It was all going smoothly until the events of July 2013. A larger lady was riding the Giant when, at the first steep descent, she tumbled out of her train carriage and fell a shocking 75 feet. Unfortunately, she didn't survive, and the ride was shut down pending an investigation. Safety experts questioned the ride's choice of restraint system, which only secured riders with a lap bar despite the high speeds and extreme turns. However, witnesses came forward claiming that before the train had left the station, the lady had alerted an attendant to the fact that her lap bar wasn't secured. Apparently, she'd only heard the latch click once, indicating that the mechanism hadn't locked properly. The attendant then performed a quick push-pull test on her lap bar, and despite her size and concerns, assured her she'd be okay. Hoo boy! Ultimately, the tragic event was put down to the victim's size and the attendant's error, not the failing of her restraints. As such, the ride was closed for just 2 months, but when it reopened, it had redesigned its lap bars and added in some seat belts. Now, larger patrons can ride without the fear of falling out, though whether they want to is an entirely different question. Flight Commander. It's no secret that Kings Island, Ohio doesn't have the greatest safety record. Since 1976, at least 7 people have lost their lives in the park. These incidents range from medical emergencies to lightning strikes, but one instance stands out thanks to the ride that was involved. The Flight Commander. Secured in little pods, riders were taken up to a height of 60 feet and whirled around by mechanical arms. Each pod was connected to a rotating section at the back, and through the use of a joystick, riders could spin their own pods a full 360 degrees. It was like controlling your own little spaceship. But in 1991, just a year after it opened, this spaceship fantasy came crashing down to Earth. A lady had boarded the ride alone, but somehow slipped out of her pod and frighteningly fell more than 60 feet to the ground. She sadly didn't survive, but the event had investigators scratching their heads. She'd been secured in with both a shoulder harness and a lap bar, both of which were found to be fully functional. So how on earth had she slipped out? After more investigating, it was then discovered that the woman had been heavily intoxicated, and that's when it all fell into place. It's believed that in her inebriated state, she fell limp, which, through a design flaw, allowed her to slide into the unoccupied seat beside her and wriggle her way out of the restraints. Maybe she was going to be sick? Or perhaps she'd passed out entirely. Whatever the reason, it didn't end well for her. The ride was closed down, but it reopened in 1992 without any more incidents. Even so, the damage had been done to its reputation, and it was shut down for good just 3 years later. Thunder River Rapids. Just about everything in Australia is out to get you. The snakes, the spiders, even the theme park rides. Don't believe me? Well, just wait until you hear what happened on Dreamworld's Thunder River Rapids. It was a pretty typical river rapid ride with large circular rafts floating around a choppy water channel that were being lifted out of the water by a conveyor belt system. With a top speed of just 28 miles per hour, this ride was hardly a breakneck adventure. Although, it became one back in 2016. That day, one of the ride's essential water pumps failed, causing the water level to drop. As it did, a raft near the conveyor belts became stranded on the support rails and couldn't make it to the unloading area. But less than a minute later, another raft came speeding up behind them, crashing into the first raft and jolting the entire thing upright. It tipped out 4 riders, who were either terrifyingly trapped beneath the raft or against the moving conveyor belt. Horrendously, none of them survived, making this one of the worst theme park accidents in Australian history. A sweeping safety audit determined that the ride's safety and maintenance systems were rudimentary at best, and that a simple, inexpensive water level monitor would have prevented the entire disaster. This unbelievable oversight saw the ride demolished.
Wait, let me see that conveyor belt again. Let me see that conveyor belt. So, yeah, so that's like an animated version of what it looked like. So, yeah, they pretty much, basically, they pretty much fell into like a saw, basically.
Area, but less than a minute later, another raft came speeding up behind them, crashing into the first raft and jolting the entire thing upright. It tipped out 4 riders, who were either ride's safety and maintenance systems were rudimentary at best, and that a simple, inexpensive.
Alright, that's gonna be the end. That was probably the worst one in this one, being ground alive. And that Tower of Power one. Anyway, that is the end. And goodbye. See you in the next stream. Hopefully I can get this uploaded with a proper thumbnail.